Imagine waking up on your 18th birthday, right? You open up an app on your phone, and you realize the U.S. government has just been quietly trading stocks for you since you were literally in diapers.
Right.
You've got this entire portfolio just waiting for you, seeded by the federal government and, growing right alongside the American economy.
It sounds like science fiction, honestly.
It really does, but that's not a hypothetical scenario anymore. That is exactly what this newly announced Trump Accounts program is setting up to do.
Yeah, it's a huge deal.
Right. So this program is launching on July 5th, 2026. And the deal is it deposits a one-time $1,000 contribution into a tax-advantaged investment account. And that's for any U.S. citizen born between January 1st, 2025 and December 31st, 2028.
Exactly. And, it's a massive pivot in how we handle public money, taking taxpayer dollars and basically plunging them directly into Wall Street.
Yeah. So today, for our deep dive, our mission is to unpack the actual mechanics of this massive new wealth-building initiative. We've got government documents, historical records, and policy critiques to go through.
We're going to cover a lot of ground.
We really are. We're going to explore the honestly fascinating centuries-old history of the bank that got chosen to run this whole thing. And just to be totally clear up front, we are going to impartially break down the intense political debate surrounding it.
Right, because there are very strong opinions on both sides.
Oh, absolutely. We're not taking sides here at all. We're just acting as your guides to unpack the arguments. Because whether you have kids or you trade stocks or you just care about how public money gets spent, you need to know about this. It's a major shift.
It really is a fundamental shift in the American social contract. I mean, state-sponsored wealth generation managed by massive private entities.
So let's dive straight into the actual blueprint of a Trump account. Like, the core mechanic is that initial $1,000 deposit from the Treasury. And on its face, $1,000 doesn't sound totally life-changing. But we have to look at the timeline here. This money is locked up until the child turns 18.
The time horizon is the whole point.
Yeah.
I mean, when you give $1,000 18 years to just compound in a tax-advantaged account, you are leveraging one of the most powerful forces in finance.
Right. It operates a lot like a traditional IRA, right?
Yeah, very much like an IRA. The funds basically track the broader stock market, so they're invested across all these major American companies. And even if you never add another dime to it, the historical average return of the market would turn that initial seed into a much larger foundation by the time they're an adult.
And the kid actually owns the account.
Exactly. The child owns the assets from day one. The parents just act as custodians, and crucially, they cannot access the funds early.
Okay, but honestly, the program isn't really designed to just sit there on that initial $1,000. The real engine here is private money.
Yeah, that's where it gets interesting.
Right, because families can contribute up to $5,000 to the account every single year. And on top of that, employers can even kick in up to $2,500 per worker annually.
And that specific structure turns the account from just a modest government gift into a massive wealth accelerator, especially for families who actually utilize those maximum contributions.
Yeah, it's huge.
And the wildest part is how simple it is to access. Instead of navigating some terrible, clunky government bureaucracy, enrollment just happens during tax season. You use IRS Form 4547. It's basically designed to be as frictionless as just checking a box.
Which makes sense, because if the government is handing out these accounts, but families can't easily see the money or manage it, it's practically useless.
Exactly. It's all about user experience.
Right. And that's the big friction point the Treasury had to solve. They knew they couldn't just build some awful .gov website, so they had to bring in private tech.
And they brought in some heavy hitters.
They really did. The Treasury tapped financial giant BNY Mellon to be the financial agent. And then they brought in Robinhood as the brokerage and the initial trustee.
Wow, Robinhood.
Yeah, and Robinhood is partnering with the National Design Studio to build this custom white label app specifically for the program. So it's basically a state-sponsored digital piggy bank plugged right into Wall Street, but with the slick user interface of a Silicon Valley startup.
It's a fascinating choice.
So, question for you on that. By bringing in Robinhood, which is a platform totally famous for retail day trading, how is the Treasury trying to change the public's relationship with government finance here?
Well, it reflects a really modern strategy. Historically, interacting with federal financial programs was awful. Paper forms, confusing portals, sitting on hold for hours.
Ugh, the worst.
Exactly. But Robinhood completely revolutionized retail trading by making it as easy as, scrolling your social media feed. The Treasury basically wants parents to check their kids' wealth just as easily.
Gamifying it almost.
Right. They are blending strict government oversight with private sector user experience. They're trying to make wealth building accessible and completely frictionless.
That makes total sense. But Robinhood is really just the storefront, right? They're the shiny app. We need to look at the actual vault.
Yes, the plumbing behind the whole operation.
Right. And that brings us to BNY Mellon. Because BNY Mellon isn't just some random bank they picked. Their ties to the U.S. Treasury literally go back to the founding of the country.
The history here is honestly incredible.
It's so cool. So BNY Mellon was originally founded as the Bank of New York in 1784.
Right.
And the architect behind it was Alexander Hamilton, who obviously would soon become the very first U.S. Secretary of the Treasury.
He actually wrote the bank's original constitution.
Which is wild. And to really get why this matters, you have to picture the American economy in the 1780s. It was a complete disaster.
Oh, a total mess. American currency was just this chaotic jumble. You had foreign coins, state-issued bills, totally dubious paper money. Trade was a nightmare.
Right.
So the Bank of New York, which was operating out of the William Walton House in New York City, they played this super critical role. They stabilized that fragile early economy just by displaying standard exchange rates for everyone to see.
They basically created financial trust out of thin air.
Exactly.
I love those little historical details. But the connections run even deeper. The Bank of New York has a couple of massive firsts in American finance that perfectly mirror what's happening today.
Like what?
Well, in 1789, Hamilton orchestrated the very first loan to the U.S. government from this bank. And guess what they used the money for?
Tell me.
To pay the salaries of President George Washington and the United States Congress.
Wow. So they literally kept the government's lights on.
Literally. And then, when the New York Stock Exchange officially opened in 1792, the Bank of New York was the very first company traded.
Oh, and their ticker symbol was BK, right?
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, if you look at the stock market today, BNY Mellon still uses that exact same BK ticker over 2 centuries later.
That's incredible.
There's also this amazing physical artifact from that era. In 1797, legend has it that Hamilton gifted the bank this massive 10-foot-tall mahogany clock.
A 10-foot clock.
Yeah. It's inlaid with 16 golden stars, which represented the 16 states in the Union at the time. And that exact clock is still sitting at BNY Mellon's corporate headquarters today.
It just shows how deep these roots go. I mean, Hamilton essentially invented the public-private financial partnership.
Right.
The early government relied heavily on the Bank of New York's private capital, and the bank thrived because of its relationship with the government. And now, nearly 250 years later, the Treasury is running the exact same playbook.
They're leaning on their oldest private partner.
Exactly, to execute this massive new public initiative.
And that deep history kind of challenges how we usually think about this stuff. We tend to assume the government and big Wall Street banks are entirely separate, almost adversarial entities.
Right, but they're deeply intertwined.
Very deeply. But look, if you're listening to this and thinking, this sounds like a massive taxpayer handout.
A single
to the
vote in the U.S.
sector.
Senate can
You
freeze the
definitely
most
aren't
powerful
alone.
government on earth.
Because while
But
the
right
history
now,
of BNY Mellon
a
is this
political
unifying story
standoff
of the early
threatens to
republic,
blow up the rules
the
forever.
modern political
we are watching
reception
the
of
fundamental
Trump accounts
machinery of
is
American
fiercely
lawmaking
divided.
just
Very divided.
grind
So
to an
let's
absolute
transition into
halt.
that
and
political
honestly, the
battlefield.
physical
And
toll
again,
on the people
just to
inside that
reiterate
building
our
is
rule
about to
here,
become very real.
we are not
Right,
taking
so let's
sides.
set the scene.
We are just an
It's March
impartial guide
2026.
unpacking the arguments from
Picture
the
the
sources.
hallways of the
Exactly.
United
We're
States
just laying
Capitol
out
right
what
now.
the critics are saying.
Aides are literally
So let's
dragging
look at the
military-style
sharpest critiques
cots
coming from
into
the
back
political left.
offices.
Oh, yeah.
Representative
Staffers
Ayanna
are
Pressley and
stockpiling
economist
energy
Derek
drinks by the case.
Hamilton
Exactly.
recently
We're
put
looking
out
at
a
a scenario
pretty
where senators might
comprehensive
actively
takedown of the
refuse to drink
program.
water.
Yeah, their core
just so they don't
argument
have to
is
leave
that
the
the Trump
floor to use the
accounts
restroom.
act as
Which
a
is
regressive
wild,
giveaway
and
to
it's
Wall
all
Street.
because the Senate is completely
And that it completely
deadlocked
fails
over
to solve
the Save It America
intergenerational
Act.
problems. Right, that big
And their
election
critique
overhaul
really
bill.
zeroes in
It's
on
centered
the
around
mechanics
measures
of
like
those
voter
private
ID
contributions.
requirements.
Like we mentioned
Democrats are
earlier, the
aggressively
government
blocking
plants
this
that
legislation,
$1,000 seat,
and
but
Republicans
families
desperately
can
want to
add up
pass
to
it.
$5,000
but they lack
a year.
the 60
Right,
votes
and that's where the
required to break
inequality
the
kicks in.
stalemate.
Exactly.
Which means
Representative
frustrations
Presley
are
points
just
out a really
boiling
harsh
over.
reality here.
Today, you
Families
have
actually
28
need
Republican
disposable
senators, people
income
like
to hit
Pete
that
Ricketts and Cynthia
$5,000
Lummis,
maximum
demanding
contribution.
that the Senate
You have to have the
force
extra
a
cash.
grueling,
For
physical,
low-income
talking
families,
filibuster.
They want to
choosing
force
between putting
Democrats
money
to
in an
stand on the
index
floor
fund
and
or,
talk
you know,
until
buying
their
a
vocal
luxury
cords
car.
just give out.
They're
And if
often
that
choosing
fails,
between
they want to
buying
break the
basic
standing rules of the
necessities
Senate
like groceries
entirely to force
or
a final
paying
vote.
rent and
And the real
investing.
shocker
And
dropped.
that is
just
what
a few
critics
days ago.
call the fatal
Senator
flaw
John
in the
Cornyn,
matching
a
funds
man who
logic.
fiercely defended the
Because
old
the
Senate
program's
rules for his
massive
entire
growth
career,
potential
just
relies
published
heavily
this
on those
fiery
private,
op-ed.
Right,
voluntary
saying Republicans must
contributions.
act
So it
now
structurally
to get this bill
benefits
passed.
affluent
Yeah, he
families
said
who
they had to
already
deal
have
a
that
fatal
surplus
blow to the
capital.
rules.
Exactly.
Which
If a
instantly
wealthy
triggered a
family
massive public
maxes out
call
that
out from former
$5,000
Senator Joe
limit
Manchin.
every single year for
Manchin
18
slammed
years,
Cornyn online for
that account is going
a
to
massive flip-flop.
absolutely
Because
dwarf
the rules
the
of the
account
Senate
of a
are
kid from a
quite
low-income
literally hanging
family
by a thread right
whose
now.
balance
the
might just
decisions
be that
made in the
initial
next few days will
$1,000
dictate how
government
American
deposit.
laws are written for the next
Basically,
century.
the Trump account becomes
Welcome to
the
this deep dive.
taxpayer-subsidized
Today,
wealth
we have a
accelerator
custom
for
mission
folks who are
tailored
already
just for
wealthy.
you.
That's the argument.
We're
yes.
going to
But
explore the
critics
swashbuckling,
rarely just tear
pirate-filled
down a
origins
program
of the
without
filibuster.
offering an alternative.
It is a crazy history.
So
It
what
really
is
is.
the left
We'll also
proposing
break down the
instead?
terrifying
The main
parliamentary
legislative
weapon
counterproposal
known
is
as
called
the
American
nuclear
Opportunity
option.
Accounts Act.
And finally, we will
But most
unpack
people
a
just know it as
mind-bending
baby bonds.
mathematical
Baby bonds,
concept
right.
Now, on a
called
surface
the
level,
Manchin
baby bonds share
paradox.
the
Right,
exact
which
same
proves
goal,
exactly why politicians
establishing
use
a
gridlock
financial
as a
account for
highly
kids at birth.
calculated
But the
mathematical
mechanics
strategy.
operate on a
So,
completely different
by
philosophy.
the end of this
How so?
conversation,
Well, instead of just
you
a
will hold
single
the secret
one-time
decoder
deposit,
ring
baby
for the
bonds
chaos
provide an
you see
initial
on the news.
$1,000
You will
first,
understand the
and
hidden
then the
game
government
theory
steps in to
that
make
drives
continuous
these
annual
high-stakes showdowns.
Okay, and the
Absolutely.
crucial mechanism
Okay, let's
there is that
unpack
those
this.
deposits are
Before we
scaled.
can truly
Right,
grasp
exactly.
the physical
Progressive
threats
scale.
and the
They aren't
massive
just
stakes
flat across the
of
board.
this 2026
The government
MZB
deposits
America
are
Act
scaled based
standoff,
on the family's income.
we really
So
need to look at
lower-income
what the
families
filibuster
receive
actually
significantly
is.
larger
And more
government
importantly, how it
deposits each
started.
year.
Got
Right,
it. And
because
baby
it
bonds
wasn't
are
designed this way
permanent,
by
too.
the
They
founders,
apply
right?
to
Like,
every
this wasn't in
single
the
kid born in
blueprint.
the
Not at
US
all. If you read the U.S.
indefinitely, not just this
Constitution,
4-year
you will
window
not find the
like
word
Trump
filibuster
accounts.
anywhere
Right.
in the text.
And there's
Wow,
another
nowhere.
massive difference
Nowhere.
in how the
The
funds are actually
Constitution
spent.
basically gives the Senate the authority
Trump
to set
accounts
its own
have
internal
basically
rules.
no
So back in
specified spending
1789,
restrictions
during
when
the
the kid
very
turns
first
18.
sessions, Right. debates
But
ended
baby
with just a
bonds
simple majority
restrict
vote.
the funds
Okay, so
strictly
51
to
votes
specific and you're done.
allowable
Exactly.
expenses.
But there was this
Things like
massive
buying a home,
loophole.
paying for
They
education,
never
or
codified
starting
a
a
specific
business.
procedure
So you can't
to
just
force
take the
a
cash
vote to
and
happen
blow it on a
if
trip to
someone
Europe.
simply
Exactly.
refused
It's
to
meant
stop talking.
specifically
to
to
build
So without a
long-term equity.
mechanism to cut off
Okay,
debate,
so if I'm tracking the philosophical
politicians
difference here,
figured
let's
out
use an
they could just,
analogy. Is
you
it
know,
basically
hold
the
the floor
difference
hostage.
between
They
the
did.
government giving
We
everyone
actually
a
have diaries
seed
from
to
the very
plant,
first
that's the
session
Trump
of the
accounts,
Senate.
versus giving everyone a
Pennsylvania
seed,
Senator
but then
William
also
McClay wrote down
providing
his sheer
ongoing
frustration
water and
that
fertilizers
senators from
specifically
Virginia
to
were
the people who
intentionally
live in a
talking away the
financial
clock.
drought, like
just
the
to
baby
make sure a
bonds model.
specific bill
That is a
couldn't
perfect
pass.
analogy.
Right.
The
They
seed is
literally
provided in
weaponized
both.
the clock.
But
I mean,
who
if
is
they were holding the
responsible for
legislative
watering
process
it
completely
hostage makes
changes.
perfect sense why the press
Proponents of
eventually
the Trump
started
accounts
calling them
believe in
pirates.
providing a baseline
Which brings us
public
to the actual
foundation,
word
but they really
filibuster.
prioritize
Yeah, it's easily one of the
individual
strangest
agency.
words
They
in
want to tie
American
the growth
politics.
directly
So where
to
does
the
it
free
come
market.
from? Right.
The etymology
Whereas
is
baby bonds
fascinating,
advocates
honestly. The
argue
term
their
really
model
took hold in the
tackles the
1850s.
root problem of
It comes
asset
from the
inequality.
Dutch word
They
"vrijboter"
want government
and the
intervention
Spanish
targeted
word
exactly where the
"filibustero."
market
which
fails.
translates
That
directly to freebooter
philosophical
or
divide
pirate,
is
right?
huge.
Yes.
And it brings us to the
Specifically,
final piece
the
of
mercenaries
left-wing
and
critique.
pirates who
Beyond
raided
just how the
Caribbean
accounts work,
islands and
critics
Latin
are
American
arguing the
countries
program is
during that
basically
era.
a backdoor
So they were calling these
subsidy for
distinguished
asset
senators
managers.
pirates.
Yeah. The Wall
Pretty
Street
much.
angle.
Right.
The
And
term
when you look
entered
at
the
the sheer
political
size of the
lexicon
financial
because
giants running
observers
this program,
recognized
you start
the
to
behavior.
understand why people are so
Senators
tense
who
about it.
talked for
Let's
hours
look at the numbers
were
behind
literally
BNY Mellon.
hijacking the
The
Senate
scale
floor.
of BNY
Like
Mellon
taking the
is
government
honestly
hostage, just like a
difficult to
pirate
even
taking over a
comprehend.
ship.
Exactly.
They are the largest
So
global
let's track
custody
how the
bank in
Senate
world.
tried to fight off these
As of late
legislative
2025,
pirates.
they have
Because as the country grew,
$59.3
you couldn't just have one
trillion
person person shut down the entire government for weeks on end.
No, let's define custody
But it took
bank
a
for
long
second,
time
because
to
they
build a
aren't
defense.
like by the
Lending
early
out your
20th
mortgage,
century. These
issuing
marathon
credit cards.
speeches
No.
became
A custody bank is
catastrophic for
essentially
a
a
modernizing
giant
nation.
digital
I can
vault.
imagine.
They
So
hold
finally,
assets
in
for safekeeping,
1917,
they
President
process
Woodrow
trades,
Wilson
collect dividends,
pushed the Senate
and
to
manage
adopt
the
Rule
insane
22.
administrative nightmare of
This
moving
rule
trillions
created a
of dollars
formal
around the
process
globe.
called cloture.
So they're basically
Cloture,
the
okay.
invisible infrastructure
which is simply a
of global
mechanism to
finance.
force an end to
Exactly.
debate.
And you
But
said they managed
here's the catch.
$59.3
It required a
trillion.
massive two-thirds majority
With a
vote to
T.
trigger.
Just to put that in
Two-thirds,
perspective
wow, which
for
is an
you
incredibly
listening.
steep hill to
That
climb.
is roughly
So
double the
stiff
entire
that over
gross
the next
domestic
4
product of the
decades,
United
the
States,
Senate only
sitting in
managed
the
to
ledgers
successfully
of
invoke
one
cloture
single
5
institution.
times.
Staggering.
That is
It really
wild. wild.
Yeah.
They have an
Southern
$84.62
senators famously use this
billion
exact tool
dollar
to
market
block
cap.
civil rights
They generate
legislation
nearly
for years.
$20 billion
The gridlock grew
in
so
revenue,
intense that in
with the net
1975,
profit margin of
the
over
Senate lowered that
28%.
threshold from
They
two-thirds
are
down
massive,
to 60,
highly
out of the
profitable,
100
and
total
deeply
senators.
entrenched.
And this highlights the core tension.
And that 60-vote threshold
Presley and
is the
Hamilton
number
point
that
out.
dominates our
The
politics
program is
today.
ostensibly
Exactly.
designed to
But
build
here's where I
individual
think a lot
wealth
of
for
people get
children.
confused.
But
When we hear the word
it
filibuster,
funnels massive
we don't
amounts
just think
of
of a
tax-advantaged
60-vote
money
math problem.
directly into the
We
financial
picture
services
Jimmy
industry.
Stewart and
Because
Mr.
BNY
Smith
Mellon
goes
and
to Washington.
Robinhood are going to
Right, a
benefit
classic
massively
movie
from
scene.
managing millions
we
of these
picture a
accounts
single
over the
person
next 20
standing at a
years.
podium,
Exactly.
reading the phone book,
It creates this
sweating,
fascinating
refusing to
dynamic
sit
where
down. A public
But
welfare
senators
initiative
rarely
is
do that
executed
anymore.
through, and
Why don't they have to
inevitably
physically
generates
talk
vast
today?
profit
That is a
for
crucial
massive private
piece of the puzzle.
corporations.
So,
Okay,
in
but
the
let me play devil's
1970s, the
advocate and
Senate
push back on
created
that for a
something
second.
called the two-track
If I am
system.
handing over
Two-track system. How did that
$1,000
work?
of my kids'
Well,
money
before the
for
system,
taxpayer
a
money
filibuster
to be
stopped
locked away
all
for
Senate
18
business
years,
completely.
I do
Nothing
not
else could
want
happen.
some fragile
The Senate
startup
realized
doing
they had a
Fair
whole
point.
country to
Let's
run,
look
so
at
they changed
BNY
the
Mellon's
procedure.
financial
Makes
health
sense.
score.
Under the
The
new
source
system,
mentioned
if a
they have a
senator simply
Piotrowski
threatened to
F score
filibuster a
of
bill,
8.
Right,
the
an
Senate
F
leadership
score.
would just set
That's a
that
metric used
controversial
by
bill
investors
aside
to
on a
determine
different
the
track
sheer
and move
financial
on
strength
to
of the
other
company.
business.
It's on a scale from 0 to
So
9.
they made it painless.
And it measures
You didn't have to
profitability,
stand up and
leverage,
destroy your vocal
liquidity,
cords
all of
anymore.
that.
You just
And
sent
an
an
8 out
email
of 9
saying,
means they
I
are
object,
practically
and the
bulletproof.
bill was frozen.
So, I mean,
Like a silent
even if
filibuster.
this program
You
is a
capture the
financial
dynamic
boom for
perfectly.
BNY Mellon
The
and
physical
Robinhood,
endurance requirement
doesn't the sheer
basically
scale and
vanished.
rock-solid
But
stability
the physical
of
records
BNY
from
Mellon
before
make
and
them the
outside that
absolute
silent
safest
system,
possible hands for our
those
public
remain
money.
pretty legendary.
that
Oh,
is the
absolutely.
big counter-argument.
Strom
Because
Thurmond
despite
spoke
the
against
political
civil rights
optics
acts
of
in
enriching Wall Street,
1957
if we're building an
24
18-year
hours
vault,
in 18
Imagine
minutes.
don't we
finding
want
out
the
your
bank that
electoral
already
hours
protects
and the
$15
modern
billion
individual
of
government's
the world's
mandatory
wealth?
spending. It's a very compelling
It does.
point.
A
pretty
in
shocking
April
realization.
When you are dealing with
2025,
public funds
Booker
intended
spoke
to
for an
grow
astonishing
over decades.
25
Imagine
hours
for a
and
second
5
that
minutes
stability is
against the
paramount.
policies of the
And
Donald
you need
Trump
an entity that
administration.
can weather
I mean, just
multiple
think about the
economic
bodily
and
efficiency of
and
25
BNY
hours.
Mellon
This money
clearly
was
has that
strictly for
capacity.
fixing a leaky
Right.
roof.
And this really touches
You
on
can't
the
even
broader
leave the
paradox.
chamber
don't
for a
fix this
bathroom
roof,
break.
It
We
is
constantly
a
rely
brutal,
on the
It's an
dangerous,
existential
test,
crisis for
highly
the House.
profitable
Exactly. It's the
endurance.
save the
The
house
company
fund
really
to
reminds
deliver
me of
massive
massive
car
car
breaks
breaks
down.
down.
The tension is
Who
always
decides
balancing
just
the
you got
public
bills
benefit
piling up,
delivered
emergency. So what do you
against the
do?
private
Everyone
property
else into the
extract
walls
along
just
the way.
because they
Take
don't
that money,
like the
pay off
Well,
fucking
we
your
have
credit
covered
cards
a
until you're
It is a
finally boring
highly
to fix the
disruptive
roof.
We really
maneuver.
have. Right.
We
Wait, that
unpacked
raises a
the
glaring
specific
question.
mechanics of the
The roof
Trump
is
account
this
program,
rule
where
is
kids
at least
born
universally
between
climate
2025 and
Every
2028
car is
get a
majority
$1,000
self-inflicted
government
hates it.
seed to invest in the stock
$1.5
market.
billion.
Why haven't they
state
voted
budget
to
designed to
destroy
destroy
it?
it?
Completely avoidable.
That is the core
incredible
tension
Welcome to the
of
deep
the
dive.
United States Senate.
Today
all
we're
the way back to
exploring
the
a
reason the
classic
filibuster
case of fiscal
survives
sleight
is
of
that
hand
permanently
coming out of
destroying it
Annapolis.
requires a
We
impartially
impartially
We're looking at the
navigated
strategic
and so
energy
destructive
investment
to the
fund.
institution
market
that it
itself.
earned a
And the
terrifying
targeted
It's a
aggressive
huge
scaling
pot of money
of the baby
meant to
bonds.
save the
It's a
environment.
nuclear
It is
option.
it sounds
turning
like
into a
Cold
hidden
War thriller.
tax
Let's
on
walk
every
through the
single
external
person
mechanics
paying an
and
electric
massive
bill. How does a
implications
parliament
actually
It really
for
is.
the
It's
future
become
of
the
the
center of
American
a
middle class.
huge
Let's take
political fight.
Which actually brings me to a final
Democratic
thought.
governor,
Changing the
understanding
environmental
Fast
written rules
forward
of the
to
Senate
year
require
2043.
compromises, and conservative critics who
That
are
is the
rightly
year
calling
that
this
highly
whole thing a
polarized
shell game.
politics, securing
And when you
finally
look at the
7
full
votes we
access
have
to their
today
accounts,
is basically
if millions of
mathematically
18-year-olds
Exactly.
suddenly
Republican
enter
So they found a
adulthood
backdoor.
is really hard to
Backdoor.
backdoor.
Our
Yeah,
backdoor
backdoor
that
that
bypasses the
portfolios.
67
Follow the money.
vote
Right there,
requirement
always
for
follow the
retirement.
money.
We are going
Here
to
is
see
the
step-by-step
fundamentally
funds
alter the
designed to
culture
fight
of the
climate
stock
change.
market.
Man, that is an
First,
amazing
Senate
question.
Majority
Just
Leader
imagine
stands
turning
up,
18
will dig into the
and
argument
instead
that
of just
plaintiff
gaining the
found
right
money
to
at
vote,
all. They
this
basically
is
tell the
essentially
presiding
a lottery
officer
tax
that
on
you
families.
unlock a written rule
compounding
Let's get right
financial
into it.
entirely
The
different
strategic
than tracking
energy
the
investment
economy.
fund.
Your
So the majority leader
entire
basically
very
stands up and
completely
claims
redefines
this
the
concept
concept
of
Well,
coming of
essentially,
age
on
in
paper.
America.
Then the
It
presiding
doesn't
officer
every
looks at the
single
legal
high school
rulebook and
senior
says,
is
no,
inspired
your
to
plan is
managed by
denied
the
in
Maryland
Maryland.
energy
The text
industry.
says
Wild
what
to
its
think
whole
about.
stated
Which is
purpose.
the
Thanks for
only
taking this deep
logical
dive with us.
See you
response.
next time.
But
Cut